And welcome back to another episode of Kris Yeti's News Review. You're not going to want to miss a single minute of this episode, folks. Stick around. So, in case America forgot, the Ukraine war is still going on with Russia, or the Russian war with Ukraine is still going on, however you want to view that perspective. What I find fascinating is that it has largely vanquished from the U.S. media outlet. So when it first was boiling up to kind of the pinnacle, oh, Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody in the U.S. became an armchair strategist, an armchair politician, and was like, yes, I see that my opinion here should really matter. And even though I have no experience in this opinion, I'm going to give more opinions. But hey, that's what I'm doing. I don't have any experience, and I'm just giving opinions. Americans get involved in international politics, well, mostly through opinions, but only for about the time span of about 4 hours. So that's an NFL game, an NBA game, a FIFA game. The list goes on and on. So the American attention span is really just, a few hours, and then after that, it's on to the next thing. What is Kim Kardashian doing? Kanye West said, what? This is exactly what Russia wants. They want everyone to shut up about what's going on with their southern border so they can deal with Ukraine, and they're largely getting their way. We don't see detailed reports on what's going on day to day. You know why? Because the numbers have dropped. News media outlets have said, oh, hey, people were clicking on these rates for a long time. Now they're not interested anymore. So their attention span is like that of a 4-year-old. They'll sit there like, oh, look, Russia's attacking Ukraine. Everyone, look, oh my God, all this controversy. And then once people stop clicking on it, then they just pivot. Be like, this lady said something crazy to a baby on the street and you should care. It's like, what the fuck is going on? I know recent news have said that the Republican Party is trying to scrub themselves of Trump because they didn't win the midterms elections. But quite frankly, that's just how you feel when you lose. Like, you're second place in a race and you're like, oh, I tried so hard, coach. And then they say, well, you still lost no matter how hard you try. So you go home disappointed. And then you start blaming all these other aspects of why you lost. Maybe it was too much TV. Maybe too many Cheetos. Maybe too many video games. Nobody knows. But ultimately, people are more likely to blame others than themselves. So we have the Republican Party effectively lashing out at every other Republican for the fault of the midterm elections. I don't think the outcome are the results of necessarily what the Republicans think the problem is. There are so many dynamic layers to voting. There are so many reasons why somebody doesn't go to the polls or why somebody does go to the polls. And even when they do show up, there are so many more layers of now additional complications of, are they verified? Politicians are now struggling with the idea, do we increase the scrutiny of voting, or do we make it more open and easy to go after? I think voting is not only a right, but it's also a privilege. And this is an aspect that's rarely considered. The American freedom allows you to choose to vote or not to vote. I don't think that's the healthiest way to approach it. What's wrong with making it mandatory for everybody to vote? At least that way we can get a more general consensus. Sure, you'll have a small percentage of folks who decide to troll their vote, but that's less than 1%. So let's just make it mandatory to vote. And that way, everybody has to vote, and there can't be any more argument about, oh, people didn't show up to the polls. Like, why not? Jury duty is expected upon us for civil service. As an American, we are told, oh, if you get jury duty, you need to show up to court, and you better sit there until you and your peers decide if this person is guilty or not. And if that's the case, why stop at jury duty? Voting should be mandatory. I mean, tell me in the comments why you think that it should or should not be mandatory. But just like taxes, you would have people approaching deadline, and then they would be like, can I file the extension for taxes? There's always going to be people who want to push the deadline. And then even with the push deadline, you're still going to have folks who just don't do it. And that's fine. We don't need to put them in jail or anything for not doing it, but maybe a small fine would be good. Would a $100 ticket be worth showing up to the polls and taking 10 minutes out of your day to vote? Probably not. And it would solve a lot of these issues where people are just like, they didn't come to the polls anymore. Well, okay, then let's find a way to make people go to the polls. Why? Put voting on the computer. Put voting on the phone. If people could vote from their phone and we had a way to identify who they were, you know, just do like a webcam thing and be like, your security is good to go. Please submit your vote. And that is the future. Whether we do it today or tomorrow, it's going to happen. So just get on board with it. Okay, guys? Up next, I want to talk more about Rings of Power. Yes, that's right, folks. Rings of Power is all over YouTube, and it's typically just kind of a hate march where everyone's like, yeah, I hate Rings of Power. Let me watch more YouTube videos about why it sucks. And indubitably, Rings of Power sucked, folks, okay? I go on YouTube and I get reassured that the show was awful, but then I go in real life, at work and home, and I start talking about this, and people are like, oh, you thought Rings of Power was bad? That's weird. Rings of Power was good to me. Why was it bad to you? And then I kind of just stop like a deer in headlights, and I'm like, oh, well, if Rings of Power was good according to you, then maybe I need to reevaluate my perspective. So then I go back and I think about it, and I'm like, no, it's definitely garbage. It's really expensive. I mean, if they told me they spent $1 million an episode, okay, I get it. You know, there wasn't really anything too dramatic that you couldn't buy at, you know, these $100 CGI programs. And let's face it, guys, that money was swindled. So this got me thinking about Rings of Power. What is it that is so bad? Well, primarily Galadriel was they had a whole plot, and they just forced Galadriel's character in the middle of that entire plot. If you look back at Lord of the Rings, Frodo, you could say, was the main character of the entire series of Lord of the Rings, especially the Fellowship of the Ring. But as it progressed, it equally distributed the weight of character development across the entire world. This is one reason why we like Gandalf so much, because he was a heavy character in the whole trilogy. And so when you have Rings of Power, you have Galadriel basically hyperimposed on every single scene that she needs to be involved in. Oh, Galadriel should be here. Galadriel should be there. Galadriel should be there. And it's like, no, there's too much Galadriel. There was a lot that's going on back then, and all this Galadriel isn't needed, okay? Galadriel's fine. Let's just leave it at that. Let's not destroy her character. She is who she is. An uptight elf who just needs to find out answers. That's fine. Okay, it happens. Don't get me started on the fact that the producers felt like cutting the hair of elves was important, because they said culture changes over time, so it would be foolish to think that a several thousand-year-old species like the elves would up and all of a sudden keep the same hair for 4,000 years. The reason why humans constantly change their culture, because the previous generation dies. So you have an entire new generation who's like, yeah, I don't like how they did things. I don't like it. I don't like what they ate. I don't like what color they liked. Yeah, it's stupid. Everything I do is better. And guess what? When that generation grows up, gets old, they die, the next generation has the exact same thoughts. It's really a miracle we're as far as we are in industrial revolution. Generational information is kind of a magical situation. In the Elvish world, in the Tolkien world, there is no generations. They may somehow produce more elves, but the older elves, they don't go away. You either die in battle or you get shipped off to the west. That's it. That's your only options as an elf. Otherwise, if you're just a lazy elf who sits around and games all day, you're going to be in your mom's basement for 4,000 years with long hair. Nobody in the elvish society is going to be like, yeah, you know what would be cool? If I cut my hair, even though everybody doesn't do that. I mean, and you look back at other historical societies like the Mongols, cutting your hair was the equivalent of death. I mean, you can see it in things like Game of Thrones, where they had the Dothraki. The Dothraki were modeled on real life Mongols from the 13th century, I believe. Look it up sometime. The history on that is phenomenal. You're going to have way more entertainment learning about what the Mongols did than the next Rings of Power season. But that brings me to the next point. Rings of Power Season 2 could potentially be a lot better than Season 1. And what I think will do this is if we have a strong development of Mordor. We don't necessarily need to see Sauron in every scene, but if they do a slow progression of Mordor, the ending scene was him staring over Mordor and like, yes, like an engineer, scouting the area, plotting, like I want to build this here, I want to build that there. Oh yeah, I want to have a fantastic restaurant over here. Everyone's going to love it. It's like the entrepreneur who has all these fantasies, and then once they start developing it, there's all these logistical problems. I mean, just imagine it. Sauron goes into Mordor, builds this huge imagination, and just marred with micromanagement. That would be light years ahead for a Season 2 than anything we experienced in Season 1. I want to see Mordor develop. I want to see it struggle. I want to see it become something. And you can still establish that it's evil. That's fine. But there's nothing outside of Mordor that is interesting according to Season 1. So, because everything, they had, I don't know, how many episodes they have? Eight episodes? And they all collapsed to just Sauron looking over Mordor? Like, what did we just sit through week after week? And we complained so much about Galadriel. I don't even feel like she's the main character by the end of it. So hopefully Season 2 is a more diverse focus on different characters. This mystery wizard guy, my suspicion is more likely that he's one of the blue wizards that nobody ever talked about. And I think Gandalf would be the go-to, right? That's the one you want your audience to come in on. Everyone loves Gandalf. He's a fantastic character. You want to invite him over for dinner. You want to hang out with him. You want to go to the movies. Gandalf is fantastic. And they know that. So it's, on one hand, very likely the mystery wizard is Gandalf. And on the other hand, it's likely that they could just say, oh, it's one of the blue wizards. And I think it's more important that they go the blue wizard route because the Lord of the Rings didn't even talk about the blue wizards. They were there in historical reference, but they weren't having any screen time. They didn't really do anything that anybody knew about. So this mystery wizard would be perfect to say this is one of the blue wizards. But that might be too specific for the audience that Amazon is seeking, and it could be completely blown apart. This is more what I think Season 2, the direction of it should go, and it's probably not going to go that way. They're probably going to double down on Galadriel. The producers are like, you know what the problem of Season 1 was? We didn't double down on Galadriel. Next season, doubling down everywhere. Galadriel there, here. Superimpose Galadriel everywhere. There's only one Galadriel in this screen. There should be 4. If they can avoid the Galadriel conundrum, perfect. All right? And again, Galadriel's fine, but let's give me Galadriel with a grain of salt, okay? There's so much going on in this world, more than proto-hobbits and Galadriel. Please expand on the world of Rings of Power beyond the few people that you have highlighted and just keep going. Keep introducing new characters. Make a few disappear. I don't know, I don't get paid to do this stuff, unfortunately. I could probably make a pretty damn good Season 2. But that's just me. And what I compare this to is like Fear the Walking Dead, if you're familiar with that. They kind of recaptured the idea of what the zombie outbreak was first like in episode 1, 2, and 3. I actually quit watching Fear the Walking Dead because the first few episodes were really good. Like, the best part about a zombie movie is when you're seeing the struggle of modern human society collapse with this massive change. As soon as humans have changed and adapted to the zombies and they're all hiding and stabbing and killing each other, it's lost its appeal. Like, at this point, it's just a different show. There is something about watching the change itself, like the struggle. It's a very small gap. And once you get past it, you're in a completely different world. And The Walking Dead, and especially the Fear the Walking Dead, they started out strong with this is how the world was. this is how the world is, and in between, this is what happened. But they quickly move on from this is what happened to this is how the world is, and I think that loses a lot of the magic. I mean, you can't milk it forever, but you can certainly do it for at least 10 episodes, and nobody has really accomplished that. And you quickly run out of ideas once you move past that stage. So I hope in the similar sense, but it's a hope. I'm expecting the worst. We're gonna see the change environment of Middle-earth with Mordor, like the neighbors. Like, I just got this house, and there's a clear pasture with mountain views. And we've been like this for a few years. And then all of a sudden, there's a bunch of construction back there. Warehouses, buildings, commercial. It just blocks the view. Let's show the neighbors of Mordor where it's like, oh, that was such a beautiful backdrop and now it's ruined. What the fuck is going on? I would love to see characters like approach Mordor like a complaining Karen, like, hey, what's going on here? This was my backyard. There are so many dynamics we could take Rings of Power. So many characters we could introduce. Please increase diversity, okay? Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments below if you think Season 2 stands a chance, because according to Amazon, they've spent all their money and they are guaranteed 5 seasons. Can't wait to see how that turns out. Season 3 will be the end of it. All right, on to our next topic. So there's been a lot of conversation lately on the internet about CGI. Is it actually getting worse than it has been in the past few years or decade or so? I mean, there's some things you can look back on, like the prequels to Star Wars, and then you have other things like She-Hulk. I was watching the CGI on this and I'm like, this is 2001 CGI. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was better CGI than this, and all I ever hear from Disney is how much they're investing in their shows. But folks, the results of their show does not equal the effort that they're describing. They're showing all these pictures of their studios and expensive backdrops and all these robots that can do triple, quadruple flips upside down, inside out. My argument with She-Hulk is it's not really a show for guys, all right? Any guy watching She-Hulk should go and watch Legally Blonde. That was a movie from several years ago. The movie is a chick flick, all right? You wouldn't go out of your way as a guy to sit down and watch this movie. I mean, some might have, but it really wasn't that good. It was very generic and stereotype. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. And it actually, Legally Blonde, I thought was a lot better than She-Hulk, especially with the way they broke the fourth wall. That was a complete embarrassment, and there's no way that's going to age well. Can you imagine in 25 years when somebody's watching She-Hulk again and the way she bounces around in Disney Plus? That's going to be so cringy. Like, nobody's going to watch it. When you make a show, please consider the people that are going to watch it in 2 decades. I actually think CGI is getting worse, but not because of effort, because of the lack of effort. I mean, there's all these programs that are coming out promising, hey, pay me $50 and I'll give you floating dragons and fireballs and so it's kind of an embarrassment when you have that on one hand for independent directors, and then on the other hand, you have billion-dollar TV show projects that seemingly can't even match up to the quality of these $50 special effects programs that I see sponsored to me on a regular basis. Let me know in the comments below if you think CGI is getting worse, because it definitely is, but out of laziness. I know we've been discussing just a little bit about technology, and the other part I want to go into is robots. Are robots going to take all of our jobs? This is something I see frequently on the internet, and quite frankly, it has to stop. So take restaurants, for example. There are robot arms that are coming out, and they basically cook for you. All right, just imagine a chef with 2 arms, but this robot, and it can do, every direction possible, impossible for a human arm to do. And it will flip fries, flip burgers, make fried rice, whatever you want it to do. These things can build cars, and they've turned them into making food. There's going to be a bit of a trial and error stage that we have to get through. But what I've noticed online is comments with these advertisements for what's coming, and then everyone's just like, oh, you're gonna take our jobs. They took our jobs. And it's look, they're not taking your job. There's nobody wanting that job. This is something that's really critical for the average American, and the average person across the world to truly understand. There's a certain point where you just can't fill 100% of the openings, and fast food and casual fast dining is a great example. Not just any restaurant, any type of food restaurant. There is a shortage of labor. You can't have an open interview and sit people down and say, we want to hire you. Nobody's going to show up, first of all, especially after the pandemic. It has been incredibly hard to hire people. It was hard beforehand, but it's only gotten more hard since then. Once they do get hired and they show up, you deal with every problem under the sun as a manager for any kind of restaurant. McDonald's, all the way up to some Four Seasons hotel, super fancy restaurant that charges you, $100 for a double cheeseburger. They are all struggling to maintain labor. And the American market, you know what they depend on? They hire people and then they put all of their weight and leverage in tips. It's not fair to the employee to not pay them properly and then the employer in turn is like, you know why you don't get paid properly? Because you're not getting enough tips. We need to fix that. We need to go to the streets and get people to tip more. No, I don't want to go somewhere, pay $20 for a meal, and then have to tip them to do their job. There's no other industry like this. I can't go to my doctor's office, and if he fixes something that's broken with me, I try to tip him. He said no. Why can't I tip my doctor $20? Is it because he makes $150,000 a year? No. He works 10 times harder than the average person, and that's what he's left with. If I want to tip an auto mechanic, a doctor, an engineer, they don't accept it. But yet the food service industry demands it. They anticipate it. And it's created this culture of entitlement. Most importantly, I like to tip when there's a reason to tip. There's nothing more frustrating than getting terrible service and then they still expect you to tip. Why should I tip when you didn't do anything? You didn't take the dishes back. You didn't bring out my food on time. My food came out cold. I have nothing but complaints, and I still have to tip you. If companies can't afford labor, then that's why we need robots. Not only can they not afford the labor, but the labor doesn't consistently show up. They call in sick. They have problems. Their car broke down. When you're in the food restaurant, trust me, you know this, it's more likely than not you're going to have to fill in a shift for your colleague because one of a million reasons came up. Yes, robots are going to take over, but they're going to fill in the jobs that nobody wants. And that's fine. People should focus on training, education. Do something that you want to do. If you want to actually be involved in the food service business, then become a chef. Go for the higher scale stuff. The fast food, they're going to turn into vending machines. So just forget about them. Move on to something that you want to do. But robots aren't the problem here. All right, now we're going to move on to our sports segment. And of course, I always like to talk about the NBA. Let's give a little update on the Lakers. Anthony Davis has been showing quite a bit of improvement. The success of the Lakers is quite frankly going to fall on Anthony Davis. I think Russell Westbrook has potential on the Lakers in a certain role. And it's actually more important for Westbrook and Anthony Davis to step up to the roles they need to play than it is for LeBron James to do that. LeBron James actually needs to continue playing his role as much as possible, but Anthony Davis is getting better. I see every game, he's quicker, he's faster, he's turning around, he's getting the ball in, and I think this is just to show as part of his talent. I hope the man continues to push himself. I hope he strives for more, because it's the Anthony Davis who doesn't want anything that becomes the Anthony Davis that doesn't do anything. So we need the Anthony Davis that wants everything, and that is a level 9,000 Anthony Davis. I mean, he's really good as a support player. If you had someone like Steph Curry on the Lakers right now, they probably would just wreck the league. But then it's like, what about Ben Simmons? Is his career actually over? Nobody seems to really figure this out, but people love dogging on this poor bastard. I feel worse for Ben Simmons than I do Russell Westbrook. I think his trajectory was a little bit better, a little bit more promising, but it's turning out that every time he goes up for the ball, it's like a 50% chance he's going to make it. Actually, 30% chance he's going to make it. Ben Simmons had a lot of potential coming into the league, and now he's unfortunately aged kind of to the bit where it would be a miracle. It would be a record if Ben Simmons turned this around and became just an amazing player. And I don't think that's going to happen. He's just a good support player, and that's what it's going to be. Sorry, Ben Simmons. I guess we'll have to keep watching you on TikTok and see all your short layups there. And finally, I want to talk about Jake Paul. This guy, of course, has the media's attention left and right. He knows how to work the system. He knows how to squeeze every possible dollar out of the revenue stream. I mean, quite frankly, is more of a genius than Kanye West, and he doesn't go around saying, "I'm a genius." Everyone, went through the past few years and saw the Paul brothers and kind of thought they were D-bags. But I really think Jake is trying to prove something not only to himself, but to the world. And I think that's kind of admirable. I may be the only person in the world besides his brother that says he could probably go pretty far because he is motivated and he has the physical capacity to go through these rounds. And yeah, everybody is saying that all he's doing is boxing retired players or NBA players, which quite frankly he is. I understand Jake doing these exhibition matches, which is fine. It makes money. And, you can't tell me for a second that you wouldn't do the same thing if you're in his position. Jake Paul does need to start fighting real players. And I think he's moving on to somebody named Andrew Tate next. It's going to be interesting to see it, but I may go against the grain here and say that Jake probably can beat Andrew Tate. But Andrew Tate isn't a top league fighter. He's good. Don't get me wrong, but I think Jake Paul will be able to beat Andrew Tate. Now, when you start moving up the ladder in fighters, there are a few names above Jake Paul that I think he has a ways to go. But if Jake keeps playing this smart, keeps training, keeps learning from these old, best fighters, so to speak, he's going to get to a point where it's indubitably impressive. I can't really say I'm a Paul fan, but the evidence is there. Jake continues to dominate where he plays, and he plays smartly when he decides to put his pieces here or there. So my prediction for Andrew Tate, he's probably going to lose. I think Jake Paul is getting better at a very quick rate, and that may be bad news for whoever he picks after Andrew Tate. But that's just me. What do I know? All right, folks, that's going to do it for us tonight. I really appreciate you coming by and showing your support. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and that dingle bell thing. Click it because YouTube, YouTube. So without further ado, cheers and good night.